Mafia Boss notices his maid hiding Bruises. What he did next shocked the entire city. It was 6:32 a.m. in Harbor Line, and the city was waking up in shades of gray and salt. From his penthouse office, a glass box perched atop the skyline. Nico Barlanti watched the fog burn off the water. Below him, the first container ships of the day were being guided into the port. Massive steel beasts laden with goods that would, by noon, be filtering through the city's legitimate and illegitimate arteries. All of them, in one way or another, paid tribute to him. Nico turned from the window, his reflection a sharp, dark suit against the morning sky. He sat behind a desk of polished obsidian that held nothing but a keyboard, a monitor displaying encrypted ledgers, and a single, perfectly sharpened pencil. He was checking the cash flow and shipping schedules for the Barlanti Consortium, an organization that his father had run with brute force, but which Nico ran with the clean, cold precision of a Fortune 500 company. The violence was still there, of course, but it was streamlined. It was surgical. It was business. The heavy door to his office opened with a near-silent click. He didn't look up, his eyes tracing a column of figures that represented a new acquisition in the Docklands. He knew the schedule. This was his first coffee of the day. Ariela Duarte had been working in the Barlanti mansion for just over 2 months. She was Latina, quiet to the point of being invisible, and moved with a nervous energy that Nico found irritating. But she was efficient, and Moira Kwan, his housekeeper, had vetted her, today like every day. She carried the small silver tray with a single espresso cup and a glass of water, and today, like every day, she kept tugging the sleeves of her gray staff uniform down past her wrists. It was an unnatural, fussy gesture. She approached the desk, her eyes fixed on the floor. As she leaned forward to place the porcelain cup on the coaster by his hand, the left sleeve of her uniform caught on the corner of the desk and slid back. It was only an inch, but it was enough. Against the olive skin of her forearm, a constellation of bruises bloomed. They were not the faint, clumsy marks of a person who walked into furniture. These were distinct, vivid, and horrifyingly specific. They were the precise shape of fingers, a grip so tight it had burst the capillaries beneath. Deep, angry purple mixed with the sickly yellow-green of older, healing injuries. It was a pattern. Ariela gasped, a tiny, terrified sound she tried to swallow, and yanked the sleeve down so hard the tray rattled. Her eyes flew to his face, wide with a panic that was far beyond simple embarrassment. I tripped, Mr. Barlanti," she stammered, her voice thin. "On the ironing board, in the laundry. I'm clumsy." The lie was pathetic. It hung in the air between them, thin and sour. Nico Barlanti did not move. He did not look at the bruises again. He looked at her eyes. He was a man who read people for a living, who dissected motive and fear before breakfast. He didn't just hear her lie, he read the raw, primal terror beneath it. This was not the fear of a clumsy employee, this was the fear of prey. A slow, cold switch flipped deep inside him. It was the ancient, possessive instinct of a man who controlled his territory down to the last blade of grass. This was his house, his sanctuary. The people who worked within these walls, who ate his food and accepted his coin, were under his protection. They were, in a very real sense, his. Any mark left on them without his permission was an insult. It was a challenge. It was a violation of his authority. To touch his people was to touch him. He calmly set his pen down on the desk. In the tomb-like silence of the office, the small click of graphite on wood was as loud as a gunshot. He did not raise his voice. He simply gestured with his chin to the black leather chair that faced his desk, a chair usually reserved for his capos or for men about to have a very bad day. "Sit down." It was not a request. She froze, her whole body trembling. "Sir, please, I have to get back to the kitchen." His voice dropped half an octave, losing all trace of warmth and becoming a velvet-wrapped steel cable. "Ariela, sit." She sat, perching on the absolute edge of the cushion as if the leather might burn her. She looked small, a frightened bird trapped in a cage of glass and steel. "Let me see both of your hands." Tears welled instantly, but she held them back. biting her lips so hard he thought it might bleed. She was shaking her head mutely, pleading. "Now," he said. His voice allowed for no further negotiation. Slowly, as if lifting incredible weights, she raised her hands. He saw she was trying to keep her sleeves pulled down with her thumbs. He reached across the desk, a rare crossing of his personal space, and took her left wrist. His touch was impersonal, clinical, like a doctor assessing a wound. He pushed the sleeve back. The damage was worse up close. He turned her arm over in the light. Then he took the right. It was identical. A matching, brutal symmetry of violence. Nico released her. She snatched her hands back, hiding them in her lap. Her shoulders hunched as she stared at the floor, waiting for a verdict. He now knew two things with absolute certainty. This was not an accident, and this was not the first time. He leaned back and pressed a single button on his desk console. The intercom hissed. "Moira, my office. Now." He didn't have to wait. Less than 30 seconds later, the door opened, this time without a preliminary knock. Moira Kwan entered, a woman in her late 60s with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and an expression that suggested she had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. She had run the Barlanti household for 25 years. Since Nico was a teenager, she was sharp, severe, and loyal to the bone. Her gaze took in the scene in one sweep. Ariella, crumpled in the guest chair, and Nico, his face a cold, neutral mask. Moira's own expression hardened instantly. She knew her boss. This was not a complaint about weak coffee. Nico did not look at the terrified girl. He fixed his gaze on his housekeeper. "Tell me everything you know about her," he said, his voice flat. He paused, letting the weight of the command settle. "Everything you didn't tell me at the interview." The accusation in the question was plain. Moira stiffened, but before she could answer, the pressure was too much for Ariella. She bolted from the chair, a choked sob escaping her. "The kitchen," she babbled, her hand pressed to her mouth. "I forgot. I left something. I have to go." She did not wait for dismissal. She fled, pulling the heavy door shut behind her, leaving a vacuum of silence in her wake. Nico stared at the door, his jaw set. The image of those fingerprint-shaped bruises was burned into his mind. It was a stain, a messy, unauthorized intrusion into his clean, orderly world. Moira waited, her hands clasped, saying nothing. 1 second passed, then 2. The decision was made. He finally looked at his housekeeper, his eyes cold as the water in the harbor far below. "From today," he said, his voice quiet but absolute, "she belongs to the house." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. The girl was now a Barlanti responsibility, and the Barlanti house always protected its own. Moira Kwan did not flinch under his gaze. She had been the executor of Barlanti family logistics for a quarter of a century. She was his father's most trusted administrator, and now his. Her loyalty was absolute, but her professionalism was a separate, towering pillar. She had failed to report a vulnerability. "Ariella Duarte. She's 27 years old," Moira began, her voice crisp, reciting the facts from the file she kept locked in her own mind. "She arrived in Harborline 8 months ago from Texas. She has no other family except for a younger brother, Leo Duarte. He's 16. Nico's brow twitched. A 16-year-old was not a child, but he was a vulnerability, a lever. "Where is he?" "He's enrolled in a vocational program at the Harborline Maritime Academy, learning ship mechanics. He's not a problem. He stays out of trouble." Moira continued. "Their parents are deceased. Ariella is his sole guardian. Before this position, she worked as a housekeeper for the Miller family in Azure Heights for 6 months. They relocated to another state, which is why she was seeking employment. Her references were spotless. But she was desperate," Nico stated. It was not a question. Moira gave a stiff nod. "The apartment she rents with her brother in West Dockside is expensive. She lost her job suddenly. She accepted a salary here that was, I will admit, well below our standard rate. She needed the money for rent." Nico processed this. Desperate people were dangerous. They were susceptible to pressure. He looked past Moira. At the door Ariella had fled through. Who was applying the pressure? Moira's expression tightened. I do not know, but I have a suspicion about its vector. For the past 2 weeks, the guard at the south gate, Marco, has reported a vehicle. A black sports utility vehicle, late model, with windows tinted so dark you cannot see the driver. It parks across the street every afternoon, just before 5 p.m., right when her shift ends. And Marco didn't report this to me. It never approached the gate, sir, Moira said, a rare note of defense in her tone. It never engaged with staff. It simply watched. In Harborline, a parked car is just a parked car until it isn't. Marco noted it in the log, as procedure dictates. He assumed it was personal. A jealous boyfriend, perhaps. It's not a boyfriend, Nico said, his voice flat. A jealous lover leaves different marks, more chaotic, less controlled. Those bruises were a tool. They were a message. He turned to his console and spoke into the secure line. Jax, I need you. The reply was immediate, a disembodied, youthful voice tinny with energy. On it, Nico turned back to Moira. Wait in the kitchen, keep her busy. Do not let her leave the grounds. Tell her nothing. Moira nodded and left. The click of the door sealing the room in silence once more. Nico walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city he owned. Someone was playing a game in his backyard. The office door opened again, this time to reveal Jax Orland. He looked more like a video game developer than the digital backbone of a criminal empire. He was lanky, wearing a hoodie under a blazer, and held a tablet in his hand. What's the fire, boss? A ghost, Nico said. Black SUV, tinted windows, parked across from the south gate. Been there every day at 5 p.m. for 2 weeks. I want to know who owns it, who drives it, and what brand of coffee they drink. Jax was already typing. 2 weeks I'll pull the last 3, just to be safe. Every city cam, traffic cam, and private security feed we have access to in a 4-block radius. Give me an hour. You have 20 minutes, Nico replied, not turning from the window. Jax just grinned. No problem. It took him 16 minutes. The tablet in his hand lit up, projecting a holographic map onto Nico's obsidian desk. A digital schematic of the estate's perimeter appeared. Got it, Jax said, tapping the screen. A video feed appeared, grainy but clear, showing the south gate. He fast-forwarded. There, 5:03 p.m., 2 days ago, and the day before, and the day before that. Same vehicle, black Grantham Explorer, custom package. The plate, Nico said. Jax zoomed in on the license plate, the image clarified, the pixels sharpening. He ran the number through his own system, which was infinitely faster and more thorough than the state's. The result came back instantly, and Jax frowned. That's weird, Jax said. Weird is not an answer. It's clean, too clean, registered to a numbered corporation, which traces back to a city vendor, which is leased by, here it is, the Harborline Strategic Crime Commission. The name hung in the air, cold and sterile. The HSCC, a brand new, mayor-backed task force, created with a massive, taxpayer-funded budget specifically to combat organized crime, which was Harborline code for the Barlanti Consortium. So the city is watching my house, Nico said. It was not a surprise. It was, however, bold. Who inside? Jax's fingers flew across the screen, pulling up internal city personnel files that he shouldn't have been able to access. Roster's long, mostly bureaucrats, but there's a law enforcement division, the field captain. Jax paused and let out a low whistle. Well, shit. Captain Damon Ward. Nico turned slowly from the window. Of course, Damon Ward, the son of the HSCC's chairman, Elias Ward. Damon was a shadow in the Harborline underworld, a man with a badge who operated with the brutal impunity of a mobster, all while knowing his powerful father would erase any complaint, bury any investigation. He was untouchable, and he knew it. There is more, Nico said. His gut was connecting the dots, and he did not like the picture. Cross-check Ariella Duarte, the girl who just left. Jax opened another window. Employee file. Okay. Born in sin. Oh, here. She filed a petition 3 months ago, residency card renewal for her brother, Leo. "And the status?" Nico asked, his voice lethally quiet. Jack scrolled. "It's stalled, kicked back twice for procedural errors. It's currently sitting on the desk of a paralegal specialist in the city immigration office, a specialist who was recommended to her by the HSCC as part of their community outreach program." The trap was laid bare. It was simple, crude, and effective. Nico finally understood. Ariella wasn't just being beaten. She was being squeezed. They were holding her brother's future hostage, and the Bruises were the collateral. They were forcing her to be a rat in his own home. They wanted her to plant a listening device, photograph his documents, or give them the layout of his panic rooms. The pieces clicked into place with cold, hard finality. Nico felt a surge, not of anger, but of a chilling, clarifying rage. The HSCC, in their arrogance, had made a fatal miscalculation. It was one thing to come after him, to play the game of cops and robbers in the press. It was another thing entirely to bring their war into his home and use his people as ammunition. And if they were willing to physically mark her, to leave evidence of their coercion on her skin before she had even completed her task, it meant only one thing. They believed they were so far above the law, so completely invincible, that their actions had no consequences. They thought they could touch Barlanti property and walk away. That, Nico thought, was a strategic error, and he would make them pay for it in public. The walk from the kitchen back to the penthouse office felt like a mile over broken glass. Ariella had been scrubbing a copper pot with shaking hands, expecting security to grab her arm at any second, when Moira Kwan appeared, her face unreadable, and said, "Mister, Barlanti will see you now." Ariella felt the floor drop away. She was being fired, or worse. She mechanically dried her hands and followed the housekeeper, her heart pounding a dull, sick rhythm against her ribs. But when the heavy door swung open, the scene was not what she expected. Nico Barlanti was not seated behind the fortress of his obsidian desk. He had moved, perched casually on the sharp edge of it, one foot resting on the floor, the other swinging slightly. He was closer. The vast expanse of the room now compressed into the few feet between them. The change in proximity was deliberate, stripping away the formal barrier of employer and employee. It made him seem larger, and the silence more absolute. He waited until the door clicked shut behind her, leaving them alone. He didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her with a heavy, penetrating focus, as if he were reading the fine print of her soul. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, yet it filled the room. "I know the man who put those marks on your arms is from the HSCC. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. I also know they are holding your brother's residency papers." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I'm not going to ask you a third time. Tell me." The dam of her terror broke. It was not the vague accusation that shattered her, but the specifics. Leo. He knew about Leo. A dry, racking sob escaped her, and she clamped her hand over her mouth, her body bowing as if under a physical weight. The truth, held back by fear for weeks, spilled out of her in a torrent of whispered, broken words. "His name is Damon Ward," she whispered, the name tasting like poison. He wanted me to plant a chip, a listening device, in here, in this office." She looked around, horrified, as if speaking the words would make the device appear. "I told him no. I said I couldn't." "Why?" Nico's voice was flat, demanding the motive. I was afraid," she stammered, tears blurring the image of the powerful man in front of her. "I was afraid of what it would mean. To bring this trouble to your house. I was afraid of you. But you refused," Nico pressed. "And he did that to you." She nodded, reflexively clutching her own wrists, rubbing the bruised skin through the fabric of her uniform. "When I refused, he got angry. He said I was stupid. He grabbed me. He did it in his car. He said if I didn't do it by the end of the week, he would make one call. He said Leo would be on a bus back across the border by Monday. He said my brother's future was in my hands." Tears streamed down her face now, silent and hot. We dated for 3 months. I met him at a coffee shop in my neighborhood." She gave a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a choke. "I thought he liked me. I was so stupid. It was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. He only got close to me after I told him I got the job here. He wasn't a boyfriend. He was an assignment." Nico remained perfectly still, his expression hardening, not in a blaze of hot rage, but in a chilling compression. His eyes became flat, dark ice. He wasn't hearing the story of a girl being threatened. He was hearing a tactical report of an infiltration. An enemy had placed an asset inside his walls, had put his hands on his property, and had used the dirtiest form of leverage to try and turn her. The cold fury that settled over him was far more terrifying than any shout. He slowly slid off the desk and stood to his full height, looming over her. But his next words were not a threat to her. They were a promise. "In this house, we have rules," he said, his voice a low vibration. "The Barlanti law, from the men at the gates to the woman who washes the dishes. If you are under this roof, you are family. You are ours." He leaned in just slightly, forcing her to meet his gaze. "And when someone touches family, they touch the entire pack." He walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and retrieved a slim, new burner phone. He placed it in her trembling hand. "This is yours now. It has 3 numbers programmed in it, mine, Moira's, and Jack's, my head of security. If you are anywhere walking home, at the market, anywhere, and you see that SUV, or any man you do not know, you text a single letter to any of those numbers, the letter H, for help. I do not care what time it is. A car will be at your location before you can blink. Do you understand me?" She stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. But they are the government," she whispered, the terror still holding its grip. "They are the police. The HSCC, you don't understand. What can you do?" A sound left Nico's chest. It was almost a laugh, but it was dry and sharp, utterly devoid of humor. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. "No," he said. "They are not the government. They are a city agency with an approved budget. I am the man who controls where those budgets go. They are a line item. I am the ledger." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe, his gaze unwavering. "I am going to drag Damon Ward and the entire Harbor Line Strategic Crime Commission into the mud," he stated, his voice calm, like a man discussing the weather. "But we will do it on my timeline. We have to move at the right pace, so they are exposed before they ever suspect you spoke to me. You cannot be seen as the person who betrayed them. You must be seen as the victim they tried to create." For the first time since she had entered his service, Ariella Duarte looked Nico Barlanti directly in the eye. Her entire life, she had been prey, fleeing from one predator to another, keeping her head down. She looked up now, past the expensive suit and the cold, handsome face. She saw the absolute, unshakable certainty. He was not boasting. He was not reassuring her with empty words. He was stating a simple, logistical fact. She was looking at a man who did not just break the rules, he wrote them. And in that moment, she realized he truly could do exactly what he said. The air in the subterranean level of the Barlanti estate was different. It was cool, dry, and scrubbed. The walls built of soundproof, reinforced concrete designed to withstand an explosion and, more importantly, block any digital or audio signal from escaping. This was Nico's war room, and he sat at the head of a polished steel table with his core team. Moira Kwan was there, her hands clasped, representing the internal logistics. Jax Orland, now focused and serious without his earlier grin, managed the holographic projector in the center of the table. To Nico's left sat Selena Hart, his personal counsel. She was a woman in a ruthlessly sharp suit, her mind a steel trap, her entire career funded and directed by the Barlanti Consortium. She existed to navigate the laws Nico chose to obey and dismantle the ones he did not. To his right sat Rafi Calder, the head of his security detail. Rafi was a man of few words, built like a light heavyweight, with a stillness that was unnerving. He was the hand that held the weapon, the executor of the consortium's physical will. "Jax," Nico said. The map of Harbor Line sprang to life over the table. Jax zoomed in, not on the estate, but on a working-class neighborhood West Dockside. Per your request, boss, full surveillance sweep on Ariella Duarte's apartment building for the last 3 weeks. He highlighted a familiar black SUV, Damon Ward's vehicle. It has been to her street 12 times, but it's not just drive-bys. He tapped a button, and a timeline appeared. 9 days ago, he parks 2 blocks away, out of sight of her building's entrance. He waits. The data shows Ariella's phone and his phone are in the same location inside his car for 20 minutes. A cold silence fell over the room. 20 minutes. Enough time to threaten, enough time to lay hands, enough time to leave the marks Nico had seen. That was the night before her first missed shift, Moira supplied, her voice tight with anger. She called in, claiming food poisoning. It gets worse, Jax said. He's not just watching her, he's been tracking the brother. A new line appeared on the map, tracing a path from the Maritime Academy. He's followed Leo Duarte home from school on 3 separate occasions. He has his leverage, and he's not afraid to show it, Selena Hart said, her voice like clipped glass. She opened a folder, projecting her own data onto the display, which brings me to the why, the HSCC. It's a brand new entity, formed just under 2 years ago. Its operating budget has increased by 300% in that time, approved directly by the mayor's office. And yet, she slid a new document into view. Their actual case reports and filed charges are practically non-existent. There is no corresponding activity for that level of expenditure. A slush fund, Nico stated. A massive one, and Selena confirmed, a financial black hole. They have the budget of a major federal agency, but the oversight of a high school bake sale. It's the perfect cover. Elias Ward gets to look tough on crime, and his commission can operate with total impunity. Funded by the taxpayer, they are a state-sanctioned shakedown crew. Rafi Calder spoke for the first time, his voice a low gravel. It's sloppy. He's a hothead, this Damon. He's putting his hands on a civilian, leaving marks, using his own car. He's arrogant. Give me the word, Nico. And I'll have a team pick him up. A quiet conversation. He'll disappear. The problem disappears. Nico shook his head instantly. No, that's his father's move. That is small, and it is messy. We don't solve this by creating a missing persons case for a high-profile city captain. The city would tear itself apart looking for him, and it would all lead back to us. That's what they want. He stood, pacing the length of the table. Our target is not Damon Ward. He is a symptom. The target is the entire commission. We aren't going to just cut off the snake's head. We are going to expose the snake, pull it from its hole, and let the city watch it eat itself. He turned back to his team. We move on 2 fronts, 1 protection, 2 attack. Rafi, I want eyes on the brother. Leo, 24/7, invisible. I want men shadowing Ariella's route to and from this house, but they are not to engage unless she is in physical danger. I want her apartment building in West Dockside covered from every angle. I want to know if Ward so much as parks on her street. Rafi nodded once. Done. Selena, Nico continued, I want you to find the money. That budget hole is our weapon. Find out where it's really going, who they're paying, what they're buying, Jax. Work with her. I want every secret account, every shell company, every meeting Damon and his father Elias have. I want to know who they eat dinner with. I want to know who they are blackmailing and who is paying them for protection. Jax and Selena exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the hunt. Moira, Nico said, his tone shifting slightly. A separate matter. I want Ariella moved. She's no longer part of the general housekeeping pool. As of tomorrow, she is assigned to the main villa, specifically to this office, my study, the library. She reports only to you and you report to me. Moira understood immediately. It was a promotion in name, but a quarantine in practice. It's convenient for her protection, sir, she said, her expression neutral. Yes, Nico said. Protection, and I want to be able to see her. He let that sentiment hang in the air, ambiguous and absolute. Dismissed. The team filed out, leaving Nico alone. The next day, Ariella's routine changed. She was brought from the staff wing to a small, comfortable room in the main villa. Her duties were now simple: maintain the penthouse office, the library, and Nico's private study. She moved through his space like a ghost, her fear of him slowly being replaced by a profound, wary curiosity. She had imagined him as a monster, a creature of violence and shadows, but the man she observed was different. He started his day not with threats, but with a stack of newspapers: the Wall Street Journal, the Harborline Herald, even the Financial Times. He listened to quiet, complex jazz on a vintage turntable. She watched him make his own espresso on a gleaming chrome machine, the ritual precise and practiced. He spoke to his men, even a gardener or a driver, with a low, demanding respect that was, in its own way, more intimidating than shouting. He was a creature of absolute, unyielding control. One evening, she was dusting the bookshelves in his study when her burner phone, tucked into the pocket of her apron, vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. Her blood went cold. She opened it. It was a photograph, taken from a distance. It showed her brother, Leo, backpack slung over one shoulder, laughing as he walked out of the gates of the Maritime Academy. A second text came through immediately after. "Did you forget our deal? I'm losing my patience. You have 2 days, or your brother takes a very long trip home." Her hands began to shake so violently she dropped the phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor. "A problem?" "Ariella," Nico's voice came from the doorway. He had entered without a sound. She flinched, snatching the phone from the floor, her face pale. He saw the terror in her eyes, the same terror from the morning in his office, and his expression hardened. "Give me the phone." She handed it to him, her fingers numb. He read the text. He looked at the photograph of the boy. He felt the cold, precise rage settle over him once more. They had dared. After all his warnings, after all his quiet moves, they had dared to threaten a child under his protection. He picked up his own phone from the desk and pressed a single button, connecting him to Rafi Calder. His voice was not loud, it was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "From now on, any lens pointed at my house, my people, or their families, that is not ours," he said, his eyes locked on the picture of Leo. "You break it, you break the camera, and you break the hand that holds it. No more warnings." The line was drawn. The war had begun. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, a percussive, angry rhythm against the glass. The city of Harborline was a blur of neon and wet asphalt far below. Ariella was working late. Long after the rest of the day staff had gone, Moira had given her a new task reorganizing the filing system in Nico's private study. It was meticulous, quiet work, a world away from the clang of pots and pans. She was sliding a heavy ledger back into its slot when she heard it. The sound was faint at first, almost lost in the storm, but it was unmistakable. A piano. Someone was playing a low, complex, and melancholy melody. It was coming from the grand living room, a space she had only ever dusted, never occupied. Curiosity pulled her. She padded silently across the marble floor, her stockinged feet making no sound, and peeked around the massive, carved archway. The room was dark, lit only by the electric glow of the city outside. At the far end, by the windows, sat a concert grand piano she had polished that very morning, and seated at the bench was Nico Barlanti. He was in his shirt sleeves, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened at the collar. He was lost in the music. His eyes closed, his fingers moving over the keys with a practiced, fluid grace that seemed at odds with the brutal power she knew he possessed. The music was beautiful, but it was heavy with a loneliness that she recognized. It sounded the way she felt. He played the final chord, letting it hang in the air, resonating with the rumble of thunder. The silence that followed was thick. "You can come in," he said, his voice quiet, not looking at her. "Standing in the shadows is for my enemies, not my staff." Ariella flinched, her cheeks burning. "I'm sorry, sir. I heard the music. I'll go back to the study." "Stay," he said. He turned on the bench, not inviting her to sit, but simply acknowledging her presence. The dim light carved his face into sharp planes and deep shadows. "It's a long night." She hovered by the doorway, her hands clasped, unsure of the protocol. He wasn't her boss right now. He was something else. He gestured to the sofa near the piano. "Please, you look tired." She sat, perching on the edge just as she had in his office, though the fear was less potent, replaced by a wary curiosity. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared out at the rain-slicked city. "How are your arms?" he asked, his voice still low, almost conversational. The question caught her off guard. They are better, sir. The bruises are fading." He nodded, his gaze dropping to her wrists, which she had instinctively tried to hide. He looked at them, but his eyes were different this time. Not the cold, assessing look of a man cataloging evidence, but something slower, warmer. "Good," he said softly. For the first time since it happened, she didn't feel the sting of shame for the marks. His gaze was not an accusation, it was an acknowledgement. "Why were you organizing files at 9 o'clock at night?" he asked, changing the subject. "I wanted to finish," she said simply. "I don't like to leave a job half done. You came here from Texas, correct?" "Yeah, sir, my brother and I. We saved for 2 years. I was working 3 jobs, one cleaning offices at night, one in a diner during the day, and I pressed shirts for a dry cleaner on weekends. It was just enough to get the bus tickets and the deposit for our apartment." She looked down at her hands. "I just wanted a new start for Leo." He understood. He looked back at the keys, his fingers resting lightly on the ivory. "My father died when I was 28, he said, his voice distant. He was killed in a car bomb during what the newspapers called a street cleaning campaign. A rival family, funded by city officials who wanted a bigger piece of the port, it was an operation almost identical to what the HSCC is running now." Ariella's head snapped up. She had never, in her wildest dreams, expected this, a confidence. "I had to take over the consortium overnight," he continued, his voice hardening as he remembered. "My father's capos were old world. They didn't trust a 28-year-old kid who had a college degree. I had to fight them, the other families, and the city, all at once. I learned very quickly what it means to be cornered by men with badges and power they didn't earn." The air in the room shifted, the vast gulf between them, boss and maid, billionaire and immigrant, predator and prey, shrank in its place. Something new settled. They were not the same, but they were not so different. 2 people defined by their loneliness, both pushed to the wall by the same kind of brutal, systemic power. He turned back to her, and this time he truly looked at her. He saw the strength under the fear, the resilience that had gotten her here. He saw the person, not the victim. He stood from the bench and walked to the sofa, sitting not next to her, but on the low ottoman opposite. So he was slightly lower, his knees almost touching hers. The proximity was electric, but not threatening. "He will never put his hands on you again, Ariella," he said, his voice a low, binding promise. As he spoke, he lifted his hand. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He did not grab. He did not take. He gently, with just the tips of his fingers, touched the skin of her left wrist, right over the place where Damon's grip had been the tightest. His touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent a jolt through her that was sharper than any fear. It was a promise given flesh. "This spot is mine to protect. There will be no other handprints here." But the memory of the other hand, the other grip, was too fresh. Ariella flinched. It was a small, violent, involuntary recoil, her whole body jerking back into the cushions, a tiny gasp escaping her lips. Nico's hand was gone before her gasp ended. He pulled it back as if he had been burned, his expression instantly tightening with self-reproach. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I apologize. I did not mean to startle you." He did not try to touch her again. He did not try to reassure her by closing the distance. He simply leaned back, giving her space, his hands now clasped loosely between his knees. He was a man of immense, terrifying control, and in that moment, he used all of it to show her respect. That gesture, the immediate retraction, the swift apology, the visible grant of her space calmed her racing heart more than any comforting embrace ever could have. Damon would have grabbed tighter. Damon would have laughed. Nico had stopped. He had seen her fear and respected it. From the shadows of the main hall, Moira Kwan watched the scene. She saw the shared moment, the touch, the flinch, and, most importantly, her boss's reaction. She saw him retreat, and she saw the girl's shoulders, which had been up by her ears. Slowly lower, a rare, soft smile touched Moira's lips. The boss had not let anyone into his personal space. Not truly, since his father died. She turned and walked silently back to her own quarters. Later that night, Ariella lay in her new, comfortable bed in the villa. The storm had passed, leaving the city quiet, but her heart was anything but. It was beating with a new, strange rhythm, heavy and slow. She replayed the scene by the piano, the shared stories, the brush of his fingers. She had spent 2 months terrified of him, then a week grateful to him as a savior. Tonight, for the first time, as she thought of his quiet apology and the controlled strength in his hands, she did not think of Nico Barlanti as her boss or her protector. She thought of him as a man, across town, in a sterile, government-issue office. Damon Ward slammed his phone down. The report was in his primary surveillance SUV. The one parked near the Barlanti estate had been found abandoned in a scrapyard, its windows smashed and its tires slashed. The Barlanti crew had found it. They knew he was watching. His leverage over the girl was slipping. He snarled, his face twisting in rage. He was done with subtle threats. It was time for a more aggressive approach. The order had been a risk, a calculated one. Moira had sent Ariella on an errand, something simple to retrieve a specific brand of pastry from a bakery 3 blocks outside the estate's main gate, a place Moira claimed was a personal favorite. It was the first time Ariella had been allowed off grounds in over a week. The shadow team was in place, 2 men in a discreet sedan, parked 100 yards away. But Damon was smarter than they anticipated, or just more desperate. He wasn't watching the villa. He was watching the apartment in West Dockside. He knew she would have to go back for her brother. Ariella had met Leo at his bus stop, just as she always did, to walk him the final few blocks home. They were arguing, a quiet, hissed argument. Leo was tired of the secrecy, tired of the ghost-like men he sometimes saw near his school. "I don't understand, Ari," he was saying. "Why are we whispering? Who are these people? Please, Leo, just walk faster. We're almost home." They turned the corner onto their street, and a plain, gray sedan blocked the sidewalk. 2 men in windbreakers, looking like bored municipal workers, got out. They didn't run. They simply moved to flank them. "Ariella Duarte," one asked, his voice flat. Ariella froze, grabbing Leo's arm. "Who are you?" "Captain Ward just wants to talk. He's tired of being ignored. He said to bring you both." The man reached for her arm. Ariella screamed, "No, Leo, run!" The second man grabbed Leo, who spun and swung his backpack, hitting the man in the chest. The first man seized Ariella, his fingers digging into her shoulder, and began dragging her toward the open car door. It was over in 3 seconds. A black Mercedes SUV, the one that had been tailing them, mounted the curb, its engine roaring. 2 men. Rafi's men were out before it stopped moving. It was not a fight. It was a deletion. The man holding Leo was dropped by a single, precise blow to the throat. The man holding Ariella looked up, his eyes wide, just in time to have his face slammed into the car door. Rafi's men didn't even look at the downed men. They grabbed Ariella and a terrified, choking Leo, shoving them into the back of the SUV. "Mr. Barlanti's orders," one of them yelled as Ariella struggled. "We are securing you." She was hyperventilating, her mind screaming. Was this a rescue or a different kind of kidnapping? The SUV sped away, leaving Damon's men gasping on the sidewalk. They drove, not to the villa, but to the port, to a dark, unmarked warehouse facing the water. They were hurried inside, into a reinforced steel room furnished like a high-end apartment, a safe house. Leo was furious, pacing. Who the hell are they? Ariella, what did you do? Ariella just slid down the wall, her body finally succumbing to the shock. She was shaking, her hands trembling so hard she couldn't clasp them. The place where the man had grabbed her shoulder throbbed, a sharp, searing pain. The heavy steel door opened, and it was not one of the guards. Nico Barlanti entered, his presence sucking the air from the room. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and his expression was a mask of cold fury. He assessed the scene, the angry, posturing boy and the girl, broken and trembling on the floor. He ignored Leo. He walked directly to Ariella and crouched in front of her. She flinched, curling into herself. "You are safe," he said, his voice low. "They are gone. You are here. You are safe." He saw her hand clutching her shoulder, his gaze narrowing. "He hurt you." She could only nod, her teeth chattering. Nico looked at her shoulder, at the torn fabric of her jacket and the angry red scrape beneath, where the man had slammed her against the car. He looked at Leo. "Go with the guard. There's a kitchen. Eat something. I need to speak with your sister." "I'm not leaving her," Leo started. "Go, Leo," Ariella whispered, her voice a reedy thread. "Please, it is okay. Just go." Leo looked from his sister's pale face to the terrifyingly calm man crouched in front of her. He went. The door shut, leaving them in a silence broken only by the sound of the rain on the tin roof. Nico stood and went to a small bathroom adjoining the room. She heard water running. He returned with a clean white cloth and a small first aid kit. He didn't sit beside her on the sofa she had moved to. He knelt on the floor in front of her, placing him below her eye level. "This is gonna sting," he said quietly. He gently pushed aside the torn collar of her jacket. His touch was clinical, yet the intensity of his focus made it agonizingly intimate. He cleaned the scrape, his large, powerful hands moving with an impossible gentleness. His knuckles brushed her collarbone, and she inhaled sharply. He was meticulous, his gaze fixed on the wound, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, Ariella," he said, his voice a low vibration. "I should not have let you leave. I underestimated his desperation." She was watching his face, the strong line of his jaw, the dark concentration in his eyes. The adrenaline from the attack was still coursing through her, a wild, electric current. But mixing with it was the overwhelming, crushing sense of safety his presence provided. He was not a guard. He was the king, and he had come for her himself. He was kneeling at her feet. The contrast was too much. The terror of the street, the cold of the rain, and now the warmth of his hand, so close to her skin. A sob, a real one, tore from her chest. He finished, but he did not move away. He stayed there, kneeling, close. She needed an anchor. She needed to know this man, this savior, this monster, was real. Her body moved before her mind did, trembling. She lifted her right hand and pressed it flat against his chest, against the fine cotton of his shirt. She felt the solid, unyielding wall of muscle beneath, and the steady, slow, powerful beat of his heart. He froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His gaze dropped to her hand on his chest, then slowly, so slowly, lifted back to her eyes. The air in the room became thick, heavy and charged. He covered her hand with his own, his skin warm, pressing her palm more firmly against him. His voice was a rasp, a whisper that barely carried. "Ariella, are you sure?" She couldn't find her voice. She could only look into his dark, bottomless eyes and nod, a single, jerky movement. That was all he needed. He rose to his feet, but he did not let her go. He pulled her up with him, his other hand finding her waist, clamping onto her, drawing her flush against his body. There was no space, no air, between them. He lowered his head, and his mouth took hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was a desperate, angry, and possessive release of every ounce of tension and cold fury he had held back. It was deep and slow and utterly breathtaking. He was reclaiming territory, erasing the touch of the other men, branding her as his. She gasped, and he used the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue meeting hers, her hand, the one on his chest, fisted in his shirt. Her other hand came up, clinging to his shoulder. He groaned, a low, animal sound in his chest, and his hand slid from her waist, up her back, until his fingers were tangled in her hair at the nape of her neck. He tilted her head, taking the kiss to a new depth, a new angle. Stealing her breath, he broke the kiss only because they both needed air, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing harsh, his eyes were closed, his jaw tight. "You are safe," he whispered, his breath hot against her lips. He kissed her again, softer this time, but with a bruising intensity. He guided her backward until the back of her knees hit the long sofa, and they tumbled onto it, a tangle of limbs. He was leaning over her, his weight a comforting, solid pressure. Her jacket was still on. His shirt was still buttoned, but his hand was still buried in her hair, and his other hand was tracing the line of her ribs, his touch firm and grounding. He moved his mouth from hers, down the line of her jaw, to the pulse hammering in her throat. "No one," he murmured against her skin, his voice a possessive growl. "No one touches you again, only me." He held her like that for a long time, his face buried in her neck, his body covering hers, shielding her. They stayed in the safe house that night, the warmth of their bodies and the smell of the rain and salt from the harbor mixed together, soothing the old bruises and the new, raw fear. The next morning, she woke to the gray light of the port. She was on the sofa, covered with a thick blanket. Nico was standing by the window, already dressed in a fresh, immaculate suit. He was the boss again. He heard her stir and turned. His expression was controlled, the fire from the night before banked to cold embers. "Rafi will be here in 5 minutes," he said, his voice all business. "He will escort you and your brother back to your apartment. You will pack 1 bag each. You and Leo are moving into the North Guest Cottage on the estate grounds, effective immediately." Ariella sat up, pulling the blanket around her. "Nico, this is no longer a quiet game." "Ariella," he said, cutting her off. "Damon Ward made it public when he put his hands on you. This is my public response. He will not get a second chance to touch what is mine." Moving Ariella and her brother into the guest cottage was not a move of protection. It was a declaration of war. It was Nico Barlanti planting his flag on his new territory, but he knew that to win this war, to provide long-term safety, he had to destroy the umbrella protecting Damon Ward. That meant his father, Elias Ward, and the entire corrupt foundation of the HSCC. In the war room, Jax clicked a button, and the holographic display shifted. "I found the money, boss," Jax said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Selena was right. The HSCC's budget is a black hole. But the money isn't just disappearing, it's being washed. A significant portion of its funding comes from a private donor group called the Horizon Community Security Fund." He pulled up the fund's donor list. "It's a shell, of course, but the money flowing into Horizon is coming from 3 corporations. All 3 are legitimate businesses." Selena Hart tapped the table, her face grim. Legitimate businesses that just happen to be direct competitors to the Barlanti Consortium's shipping and logistics arms. They're not just funding a slush fund. They are paying the HSCC for a private, state-sanctioned army to disrupt our operations. This is pay to play. They want the HSCC to clean up the docks, which means cleaning us out. They've weaponized the city, Nico said, his voice a low growl. "Then we give the city a weapon of its own," Selena replied. She placed a slim data drive on the table. "I've compiled the initial package. It's anonymous, routed through 3 different offshore servers. It contains 3 things." She listed them on her fingers. 1. The high-resolution traffic camera footage from the street outside Ariella's apartment, showing Damon Ward's vehicle and the clear physical altercation. It's grainy, but you can see him grab her. 2. The anomalous budget reports for the HSCC, showing a 300% increase in funding over 2 years with no corresponding arrests. And 3. A partial list of illegal surveillance targets we found in their server targets that include 2 city council members, a federal judge, and 3 journalists. "Where is it going?" Nico asked. "To every inbox at the Harborline Herald and the Coastline Daily," Selena said. "It will detonate tomorrow at 9 a.m. Nico nodded slowly. "Good, that's the public front. Now for the political." He picked up his secure line and dialed a number from memory. Councilman Myers. Nico's voice became smooth, almost friendly. Nico Barlanti, I trust your wife enjoyed the antique clock. Good, good. I'm calling about a small, troubling matter. I was reviewing some city expenditures, and I'm just concerned. It seems the city is funding a new commission, the HSCC, that has developed a habit of assaulting immigrant women. He paused, letting the words sink in. Trip Myers owed his career to Nico, who had made a very specific, very incriminating file about the councilman's gambling debts disappear 3 years prior. Yes, assaulting them, Nico continued, his voice full of false concern. I mean, can you imagine the press, a city-funded agency, using taxpayer money to strong-arm a young woman, a housekeeper? It's a terrible look for the mayor, a terrible look for anyone who approved that budget. I just thought you should know. He hung up. That shakes the political tree, he said to his team. Now, we add one more layer, misdirection. He looked at Jax. I want you to leak a new rumor, something just for the street. I want every bookie, every wise guy, every online comment section troll to hear that the HSCC is secretly on the payroll of the Falcone family. Selena's eyebrows shot up. The Falcones were their oldest, weakest rivals. You're feeding them to the wolves. I'm forcing Elias Ward to climb onto a stage, Nico said. The press leak will accuse him of corruption. This street leak will accuse him of being our rival. He'll be forced to hold a press conference to deny everything. He'll have to step into the spotlight to defend his integrity. And when he does, he will be a target for us, the politicians, and every other family in the city. He will draw the fire onto himself. The plan was in motion. But Damon Ward, trapped and furious, made the final, fatal mistake. From his office. Damon was losing his mind. The girl was gone. His surveillance was blind. His father was screaming at him about unnecessary attention. He felt the noose tightening, and he did the one thing a man in his position should never do. He acted out of pure, arrogant rage. He opened his own encrypted terminal. He couldn't find Ariella, but he knew who ran the Barlanti house. He would find her through Moira Kwan. He began a brute force attack on Moira's personal cell phone, trying to access her call logs, her location data, anything that would point him to the safe house. In the war room, a red icon flashed on Jax's screen. A wide, shark-like grin spread across his face. He's in, Jax whispered, his fingers flying. The idiot is in. He's trying to hack Moira's phone. Can you trace him? Nico asked, his voice sharp. Trace him, boss. He's using his own terminal. He's so arrogant he thinks our firewalls are like the city's. I'm not just tracing him. I am inside his system. I have the IP address, the machine's signature. Oh, this is beautiful. The intrusion signal is originating from a secure server located physically inside the HSCC headquarters building. Selena Hart actually smiled. He didn't just knock. Nico, he kicked the door down and signed the guest book. That's a federal crime. Using state resources to commit an illegal wiretap on a private citizen, that's not just a scandal, that's an arrest. Nico looked at the data drive Selena had prepared for the press. Change of plans. The press gets the rumor. They don't get the hard evidence. Not yet. He looked at Selena. This new data, the hacking log, the IP trace, I want you to package it with the video of Damon assaulting Ariella. This goes to a different authority, a higher one. I want this on the desk of the Urban Federal Integrity Commission by midnight. This was the kill shot. The press would create chaos, but the UFIC was the only body in the city with the power to investigate, indict, and dismantle another city agency. Rafi, who'd been silent, finally spoke. And when they get cornered, when Ward realizes he's being investigated by the feds, he's a rat. He'll get desperate. He might make a move on the villa to grab the girl, thinking she's his only way out. Nico nodded. He might. And you'll be ready. My men have body cameras, Rafi said. The perimeter is covered from every angle. If one of his marked cars or unidentifiable thugs sets foot on our pavement, Jax has a dedicated, encrypted feed ready to go live on every dark web forum in this city. The whole of Harbor Line will see who is truly above the law. The trap was set. The pieces were all in place. Later that night, Ariella was in Nico's study, nervously refilling a water decanter. He was standing by the window, watching the city, a general waiting for the first shots of dawn. She was terrified. The cottage was safe, but it felt like a gilded cage. He sensed her fear. He turned to her, his face unreadable in the dark. "The storm is here. Ariella," he said, his voice soft. "Tomorrow, this entire city is going to shake. There will be noise. There will be accusations. They will scream my name, and they will scream yours." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her. "When it happens, I want you by my side, not in the cottage. Here, with me. If I tell you to hug me, you hug me. If I tell you to get on the floor, you get on the floor. We will survive this. But we have to move to the same rhythm. Do you trust me?" She looked up at him, at the man who had turned her small, private pain into a city-wide war. She nodded. "I do." The bomb went off at 9 a.m. sharp. The Harborline Herald's digital front page switched over, and the headline exploded across the city's consciousness. HSCC Crime-Fighting Tactics Commission officer accused of assaulting immigrant worker to force informant role. The article itself was a masterpiece of implication, citing anonymous sources within City Hall about runaway budgets and rogue enforcement tactics. It didn't name Damon, and it didn't name Ariella, but it didn't have to. By 9:30, the social media feeds of every politician who had ever voted to fund the HSCC were on fire. The public was outraged. Elias Ward, a man who valued his political image above all else, scrambled. He called an emergency press conference at the Municipal Administration Tower by 11 a.m. He stood at the podium, his face a mask of grave, paternal concern. He spoke eloquently about the difficulties of aggressive policing and the unfortunate zeal of youth. "While I stand by the Commission's work," he said, his voice smooth and practiced, "it has become clear that one junior officer may have overstepped his bounds." He did not name his son, but the implication was clear. "We will be fully cooperating with an internal investigation. The HSCC is, and always will be, transparent." He was making a scapegoat, cutting his own son loose to save the integrity of his corrupt organization. In his office, Damon Ward watched his father's betrayal on a live feed. Junior officer. The word was a slap. Overstepped. He had done exactly what his father had trained him to do, use any means necessary. And now, he was being sacrificed. A cold, white-hot rage burned away the last of his reason. If he was going down, he was taking the entire Barlanti house with him. He was taking the girl. He stormed from his office, grabbing his tactical vest. He rounded up a half-dozen officers loyal to him, men who had benefited from his protection. "Emergency operation," he roared, his voice cracking. "We have a credible threat that a material witness is being held against her will by Nico Barlanti. We are moving in for emergency extraction. Now." They piled into two black HSCC vehicles, hit the lights, and sped toward the Barlanti estate. The villa was waiting. The massive, 20-foot-tall iron gates were closed and locked when Damon's vehicles screeched to a halt. The only person waiting for them was Rafi Calder. He was dressed in a simple polo shirt and slacks, leaning against a stone pillar, looking bored. Behind him, positioned strategically on the lawn and upper balconies, were 5 of his men, also in plain clothes. Each man, including Rafi, wore a small, dark button on his shirt. It was a high-definition body camera. In the war room, Jax Orland watched 6 different feeds converge on his screen, and, "We are live," he whispered. He pasted the encrypted link into 24 private Harborline political blogs, activist groups, and back-channel news forums. The viewer count, a small number in the corner of his screen, began to climb. 100, 500, within 3 minutes it had passed 5,000. Damon burst from his car, his hand on his sidearm. "Open these gates, Calder. We have a special warrant. We are here to seize a material witness. Ariella Duarte." Rafi didn't even look at the paper Damon shoved through the bars. "That warrant." Rafi's voice was calm, projecting perfectly for the microphone on his shirt. "That's city paper. It's not worth anything here. It's just paper to wipe your windows." "You are obstructing a state investigation," Damon shrieked. "Give us the girl!" Upstairs, in the penthouse office, Ariella stood by the window, her hands pressed to her mouth. She watched in horror as Damon, his face purple with rage, looked up, seemingly locking eyes with her through the glass. He raised his arm and pointed, a dramatic, accusatory gesture for his men. "Her Ariella Duarte. We are here for her." He had put her name in the air. He had exposed her. She felt a wave of nausea. Nico, who had been standing behind her, placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "It is all right. He just lost the game." He turned from the window. "It is time." Ariella watched as Nico Barlanti walked out the massive front doors of the villa, his posture utterly relaxed. He was in a black suit, no tie, his hands empty and at his sides. He stopped in the middle of the manicured lawn, in full view of everyone. He looked, for all the world, like a man about to address his stockholders. He spoke, his voice measured and clear, carrying easily to the gate. "Good afternoon. Captain Ward, you seem to be confused." Damon stared, momentarily speechless at Nico's audacity. "You are not here to seize a witness," Nico continued, his voice dangerously calm. "You are here to kidnap my employee. You are trespassing, with armed men, because she refused to let you put your hands on her." He smiled, a cold, empty gesture. "And you should know the cameras are rolling. The entire city of Harborline is watching you threaten an unarmed woman in her own home." The public accusation, the sheer confidence of it, shattered Damon's last sliver of control. You bastard," he screamed. One of the young HSCC officers, caught in the escalating madness, drew his service weapon and chambered a round. The sharp clack-clack of the slide cut through the air. Instantly, Rafi's 5 men moved as one. 5 weapons appeared, and 5 more identical clack-clack sounds echoed from the lawn. The air froze. It was a perfect standoff, with armed city police pointing weapons at armed private security, broadcast live to thousands. Damon's face was pale, his eyes wide. He had lost control. He opened his mouth, about to give an order that would have started a bloodbath. At that exact second, a new voice cut through the air, squawking from the radios on the belts of every HSCC officer. "All HSCC units, stand down. Repeat. All HSCC units are to stand down. By order of the Urban Federal Integrity Commission, all operational authority of the Harborline Strategic Crime Commission is hereby suspended. Pending federal investigation, all officers are to return to headquarters and surrender their weapons and badges. Acknowledge." The silence that followed was absolute. The HSCC officers looked at each other, then at their radios, then at Damon, suspended. Federal investigation. Damon's arm, the one pointing at Ariella, fell to his side. He looked at Nico, who stood on the lawn, untouched, his expression unreadable. The entire confrontation, from Damon's arrival to the federal shutdown, had taken less than 15 minutes. The clip, titled HSCC Implosion, was the most shared video in Harborline by nightfall. The public had just watched a mafia boss speak more reasonably and act with more authority than the tax-funded police. Suspension. The word was a death sentence. Damon Ward, son of Elias Ward. Pride of the HSCC was finished. The federal investigation meant his badge, his career, and his entire identity were gone. It had all been taken from him. And in his shattered, raging mind, there was only one person to blame: the maid, Ariella. She was the one who had refused him, the one who had run to Barlanti, the one who had started this. He no longer had any rules. He had nothing left to lose. He waited. He knew the estate's routines. At 2 p.m., a private sanitation truck always serviced the Barlanti compound, and a separate car often followed it out for weekly supplies. He waited in a stolen car down the road, his heart hammering with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and despair. Right on schedule. The massive garbage truck rumbled out of the south gate. Just as it cleared the drive, Damon floored his car, ramming the truck's rear wheel, creating a perfect, chaotic blockade. The estate's black sedan, which had been following behind with Moira and Ariella inside, was forced to slam on its brakes. It was the 2-second window he needed. before Rafi's shadow car, parked further up the street, could even react to the accident. Damon was out of his vehicle. He ripped open the sedan's back door. Moira lunged at him, but he shoved the older woman back against the seat and grabbed Ariella by the arm, dragging her out. He threw her into his own car, sped around the wreckage, and disappeared into the Harbor Line traffic. Rafi's men found the sedan's driver, stunned, and Moira, trembling with fury. Left on the steering wheel was a single piece of paper. A note scrawled in angry capitals. "If you want her back, come to Maintenance Bay number 7, Eastport." Below it, he had added one last arrogant detail, an HSCC warehouse. Nico Barlanti did not call the police. He did not call the UFIC. He stood in his war room, his face carved from ice. "He's not just a rat," he said, his voice a lethal calm. "He's a stupid rat. He's cornered, and he thinks he has one last piece of cheese." He looked at Jax. "Maintenance Bay 7. I want eyes." "Already in, boss," Jax said, his fingers a blur. "The HSCC used our city contract for their security install. They have a standard firewall, which means I've owned their cameras for the last 48 hours. He's in there. He's got her tied to a chair." Jax didn't look up. "He hasn't hurt her. Not yet. He's just yelling." "Put it live," Nico said. "Live where?" "Everywhere," Nico ordered. "I want the Harbor Line Herald's homepage. Use the access point you prepped. I want this feed on every screen in this city. Now." Nico turned to Rafi. "Full team. We go in hard." Inside the cavernous, damp warehouse, Damon Ward was pacing in front of Ariella. She was bound to a metal chair. Her face pale but defiant. He was ranting, his voice echoing in the empty space. A man coming apart at the seams. "You did this. You think you're better than me. You're a maid, you clean toilets," he screamed, his face inches from hers. "You could have had me a captain, but you chose him. You chose a greaseball mafia thug over me. You don't get to choose. Ariella, you are mine." "I was never yours, Damon," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I was just a way for you to get into his house." His hand snapped up, and he almost struck her, but he stopped himself. No, I need you. I need you perfect. When he comes here, when he kneels, when he begs me for you, then maybe I'll let him watch." The massive roll-up door of the warehouse exploded inward, a black SUV smashing through it as if it were paper. Before the metal had stopped scraping, 4 of Rafi's men were out, fanning into formation. Nico stepped out of the vehicle, not running, his long black coat billowing around him. He and Rafi flanked the SUV, weapons raised, but not firing. "Ward," Nico's voice boomed, cutting through Damon's tirade. Damon spun, dragging Ariella's chair to use her as a shield. He pressed the barrel of his gun to her temple. "That's it. Barlanti, on your knees, or she gets it." Nico stood motionless, his weapon pointed at the floor. He was a good 20 yards away. Ariella was in the line of fire. He couldn't risk the shot. He saw the red, pinprick lights of the active cameras on the ceiling beams, and he saw the feed mirrored on Jax's tablet in Rafi's hand. They were live. He raised his voice, not in anger, but with the clear, projecting tone of a man making a public announcement. "You're right, Ward," he called out. His voice laced with contempt. "She's a maid. She's a hard-working woman. And the entire city of Harbor Line is listening to you call a woman trash while you hold a gun to her head. You must make your father very proud." Damon froze. What did you say?" "The cameras." "Damon," Nico said, gesturing with his chin to the ceiling. "The little red lights, you're broadcasting. The Herald has you on their front page. You wanted to be famous. Congratulations." Damon's eyes shot up. He saw it, the blinking red light of a live camera. His face, the gun, the bound woman, his ranting, it was all going out. The realization hit him, a physical blow. The panic, the confusion, the pure animal terror, it made him stupid. He took his eyes off Nico for one fatal second, staring up at the light that was destroying him. "Now," Nico said. A single, muffled pop echoed from Rafi's position. It was not a gunshot. It was a high-velocity rubber slug. It struck Damon square in the right shoulder. the one holding the gun. The impact spun him around, shattering his collarbone. His weapon clattered to the concrete. As Damon screamed and fell, Nico was already moving, covering the distance in a sprinter's dash. He ripped the ropes from Ariella, pulling her from the chair and hauling her bodily against his chest. She was shaking, her adrenaline giving way to shock, her body vibrating. She locked her arms around his neck, burying her face in his coat, clinging to him as if she were drowning. He was an anchor in the spinning, violent chaos. Nico held her just as tightly, one hand clamped on her waist, the other cradling the back of her head. His face pressed into her hair. He was breathing hard, the smell of her soap and fear filling his lungs. He felt the tremor of her body against his. "I told you," he whispered, his voice a low, possessive growl, meant for her but loud enough for the hidden microphones. "I told you. No one takes you from me. Ever." He pulled back just enough to look at her. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted. He didn't care about the cameras, the feed, or the city. This was his. He lowered his head and pressed a long, hard kiss to her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of ownership. It was a brand. A public declaration. He finally pulled her behind him, shielding her with his own body, just as the sound of new sirens filled the air. A different team, this one in official UFA tactical vests, flooded the warehouse. They'd been waiting for Selena's call. They swarmed past Nico, ignoring him completely, and fell upon the whimpering, clutching Damon Ward. The city of Harborline watched it all live. They watched the Mafia boss save the woman, and they watched the federal police arrest the corrupt city captain. The lines were not just blurred, they were redrawn. The 9 p.m. news cycle was a slaughter. Every local station, every online portal ran the same banner, a sentence that had already become legend in the city. Harborline Crime Commission kidnaps Maid to silence her exposed on live feed. The city of Harborline was in a state of collective shock. They were not shocked that the Mafia existed. Everyone knew the Barlanti name. They were shocked that the billion-dollar, state-funded agency created to fight that Mafia had been exposed as the real monsters, acting with the clumsy desperation of a street-level kidnapping crew. The political fallout was immediate and absolute. The mayor, his face pale and his career in flames, appeared on television before 10 p.m. He announced the immediate, indefinite suspension of the entire Harborline Strategic Crime Commission. He announced a full, independent federal investigation into its chairman, Elias Ward. And, in the move that finalized Nico's victory, he declared the Horizon Community Security Fund a corrupt entity and ordered its assets frozen and liquidated. Nico had achieved his goal. He hadn't just removed a man. He had surgically dismantled the entire corrupt institution that supported him. When Ariella returned to the Barlanti estate, she was no longer the quiet housekeeper. Rafi himself drove the car, and 2 of his men in sharp suits walked on either side of her from the car to the guest cottage. It was not a prisoner's escort, it was an honor guard. The staff, who had all been glued to the live feed, watched her with a new, profound awe. Online, she was already a folk hero, the maid who toppled an agency. In the hidden forums of the city's service industry, dozens of anonymous messages appeared, thanking her. Other immigrant women, other maids, waitresses, and nannies shared their own quiet stories of harassment by men with badges, celebrating the one who finally brought the system down. Later that night, Nico sent word he wanted to see her. She walked into the penthouse office, the room where she had first shown him her bruises. The vast obsidian desk was dark. He was not behind it. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city he had just rearranged. He turned as she entered. The space between them, once a chasm between boss and servant, had vanished. "It is done," he said, his voice low. "Elias Ward is finished. They will never bother you again." She stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped. "Thank you for what you did. For me, for Leo. I don't know how I can—" "Nico," he interrupted, his voice soft. He stepped away from the window, closing half the distance between them. "My name is Nico." He stopped, his gaze intense. Ariella, I need to be clear. When I first saw those marks on your arm, my reaction was proprietary. You were in my house, under my protection. It was an insult to me. It was territorial. He took another step. That is not what this is anymore. That night in the safe house. When I held you. When you kissed me. That was not about territory. That was not about protecting an employee. He paused, his throat working. I have not been able to think of you as anything other than a woman. My woman since that night. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were not tears of fear. The constant cold terror that had lived in her stomach for months was gone, cauterized by the day's events. She looked up at him, this powerful, dangerous man, and she felt only stillness. All my life, she whispered, her voice thick. I have been told to be quiet, to not make trouble. When Damon hurt me, I thought it was just my fault for being in his way. She took a shaky breath. You were the only person in this whole city who saw me. You were the only one who believed me, from the very first second. You didn't ask if I was lying, you just fixed it. He closed the last foot of space between them. He raised his hand, slow and deliberate. She did not flinch. He did not touch her bruises. He laid his palm gently against her cheek. I will always believe you, he murmured. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. This was not the frantic, adrenaline-fueled embrace of the safe house or the desperate, protective kiss on the forehead in the warehouse. This was a choice, her choice. She rose on her toes, her hands coming to rest on his chest, and she kissed him. The kiss was not rushed. It was deep and slow and profound. It was a claiming, an answer, a treaty signed in the quiet of the penthouse. His hand slid from her cheek to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her gently but firmly. Her arms, which he had first seen as objects of violence, wrapped around his back, her fingers gripping his suit jacket, pulling him closer. It was a silent promise, an exchange of 1,000 words, safe and secure, high above the conquered city. He finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. There is one last piece, he said, his voice a low rumble. Your brother, his residency papers, they are still trapped in the city system. She tensed, the old fear a distant echo. Elias Ward. He has no power, Nico said, but we will not use his broken system. It is tainted. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. I have just established a new charitable organization, the Harborline Restoration Fund. It is designed, he said, a glint in his eye, to assist those who have been victims of bureaucratic corruption. Tomorrow, my lawyers will file a new application for Leo. Sponsored by the fund, he will have his papers in 6 months. You are no longer vulnerable. No one will ever have a hold on you again. Outside the glass walls, the city buzzed. Late-night pundits talked endlessly, marveling at the invisible hand that had so perfectly coordinated the press leaks, the political pressure, and the federal investigation. No one dared say the name Barlanti. They did not have to. In the alleys and the high-rises, the underworld knew. The message was clear. You do not touch Nico Barlanti's people. Later, the night air was cold, but the main balcony was heated. Nico stood at the railing, looking down at his city. The glass door slid open and Ariella joined him. He opened his arm, and she stepped into his side, fitting against him as if she were made to. He picked up a thick cashmere blanket from a nearby chair and wrapped it around them both, pulling her tight. They stood in silence for a long time, two silhouettes against the glittering lights. From now on, Nico said, his voice a low promise against her hair. Anyone who wants to touch you has to go through me, and this whole city knows it now. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. It also helps us a lot if you hit the hype button to make sure this story gets heard by more people.